The moment I pulled into the driveway of what used to be my family home, I felt Richard's hand cover mine on the gear shift. "Are you certain you want to do this, Helen?" His voice was calm, steady as always, but I heard the protective edge underneath. I looked at the man who had somehow found me in the wreckage of my life and made me believe in second chances. At 55, Richard carried himself with a quiet dignity that had drawn me to him 6 months ago at that charity book sale. He dressed simply, drove a modest sedan, lived in a comfortable but unassuming townhouse. Nothing about him screamed wealth or status, and that was exactly what I loved. He saw me, the real me, not the broken divorcee, not the woman whose husband had left her for a younger model, not the mother whose daughter barely spoke to her anymore. "I'm certain," I said, squeezing his fingers. "Emma needs to know I'm moving forward. And it's Christmas. Maybe the season will soften hearts." Richard's smile was gentle, knowing. "Hope is a beautiful thing, darling." We walked up the path together, my arm through his, and I rang the doorbell of the house I'd been politely uninvited from after the divorce. Emma had made it clear that Christmas was for real family now, meaning her father's side. But this year she'd extended a grudging invitation when I'd mentioned my engagement. Emma opened the door, her eyes immediately travelling from my face down to Richard's worn but clean jacket, his sensible shoes, his silver hair that he kept neatly trimmed himself. "Mum." She didn't move to hug me. "You're here." "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." I stepped forward and kissed her cheek, feeling her stiffen. "This is Richard, the fiancé." Emma's tone could have frosted the windows. "Come in, I guess." The living room was packed with relatives I recognized from my marriage, people who had smiled at me for 25 years and then evaporated like morning dew the moment the divorce papers were signed. My former mother-in-law, Patricia, sat in the place of honor by the fireplace, her hawkish eyes already assessing Richard like a stock she was considering shorting. "Everyone, this is my mother and her friend," Emma announced, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "Fiancé," I corrected quietly but firmly. "Richard is my fiancé." Patricia's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "How lovely. Another marriage. Third time's the charm, they say, though I believe this is only your second, dear Helen." "Second and final," I replied, refusing to let her see me flinch. "When you find the right person, once is enough." Emma's husband Mark emerged from the kitchen carrying a beer, his polo shirt and khakis screaming country club membership and nouveau riche insecurity. He'd made his money in cryptocurrency, or so he constantly reminded everyone, and seemed to believe this made him a modern Rockefeller. "So this is the lucky guy." Mark's handshake with Richard was aggressive, performative. "Emma tells me you're retired." "I am," Richard said smoothly. "I find it gives me more time for the things that matter." Right. What did you retire from?" "Business." The vagueness seemed to irritate Mark, who was used to people either boasting about their accomplishments or being impressed by his. "What kind of business?" "The kind that allowed me to retire early." Richard's smile was pleasant but revealed nothing. I'd learned he was a private man, and I respected that. He'd told me he'd worked in international trade and done well enough to live comfortably. That was all I needed to know. Emma appeared with drinks, thrusting a glass of cheap wine at me while offering Richard nothing. "We weren't sure what you'd drink. We didn't want to waste the good bottles." The insult hung in the air like cigarette smoke. I started to speak, but Richard touched my elbow gently. "Water would be perfect, thank you," he said to Emma. "I'm driving, and I want to keep my wits about me. Your mother is precious cargo." I saw something flicker across Emma's face. Confusion, maybe. Or the faintest recognition that this man treated me with a regard she hadn't witnessed in years. Dinner was announced, and we filed into the dining room where Patricia had clearly orchestrated the seating to maximize discomfort. Richard and I were placed at the far end of the table, surrounded by the most judgmental relatives, while Emma and Mark held court at the other end with the younger crowd. As we settled in, I noticed the pointed looks, the whispered comments behind hands. My former sister-in-law, Janet, leaned across to her husband loud enough for me to hear. "I wonder if he even owns a suit. Look at that jacket. It's practically threadbare at the elbows." Richard continued cutting his turkey with perfect composure, as if he were dining at the White House rather than being silently mocked by people who measured worth in designer labels and luxury car leases. "So, Richard," Patricia called down the table, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations. "Helen mentioned you live in Riverside. That's quite a modest neighborhood, isn't it?" "It suits my needs," Richard replied. "I prefer substance to flash." "How philosophical." Patricia's smile was venomous. "And what do you drive? I noticed that rather dated sedan in the driveway." "A 2015 Toyota. Excellent safety ratings. Very reliable." Mark snorted into his wine glass. "I just traded in my Mercedes for a Porsche Taycan. Electric, you know. Better for the environment and faster than anything on the road." "How conscientious of you," Richard said without a trace of irony. The meal continued in this vein, a slow-motion assassination by 1,000 cuts. Each course brought new opportunities for Emma, Mark, and the relatives to highlight what they perceived as Richard's inadequacies. His simple watch compared to Mark's Rolex, his lack of country club membership, his unknown career background, his modest lifestyle. I watched it all, feeling a familiar burning in my chest. This was exactly what I'd endured in the final years of my marriage, when my ex-husband's family had made it clear I wasn't sophisticated enough, wasn't connected enough, wasn't enough, period. I'd thought perhaps Emma would be different, would remember how those judgments had hurt me, would choose kindness. I'd been wrong. "Mum, remember when you and Dad used to host Christmas?" Emma's voice carried down the table. "Those were such elegant affairs. Dad knew how to pick the right wines, the right caterers. He understood the importance of presentation." "Your mother hosted those parties," Richard said quietly, his first direct contradiction of the evening. "I imagine she did most of the work while your father took the credit." Emma's face flushed. "You don't know anything about our family." "I know what your mother has told me, and I know what I see." Richard's voice remained level, but steel threaded through it now. "I see a woman who gave 25 years to a marriage, who raised a daughter, who maintained a home, and who was discarded like yesterday's newspaper when someone younger came along. I see a woman who has been nothing but gracious tonight while being subjected to passive-aggressive insults from people who should be grateful to have her in their lives." The table fell silent. Patricia's face had gone rigid with shock that someone had dared to speak truth in her domain. "How dare you?" Emma whispered. "You come into our home—" "Your mother's former home," Richard interrupted gently, "and I come as her fiancé, which means I will not sit quietly while she is disrespected, no matter how subtly you think you're doing it." Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. "I think you need to watch your tone, old man. You're a guest here." "Mark," Richard's voice could have cut diamonds. "Sit down." Something in his tone made Mark hesitate. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Someone who had commanded rooms far more important than this one. "You don't tell me what to do in my own—" "It's not your house," Richard said calmly. "It belongs to Patricia and was once Helen's home. And you'll sit down because you're about to embarrass yourself far more than you already have, and I'm trying to save you from that." The authority in his voice was unmistakable now. This wasn't the quiet, modest man who had smiled through their insults all evening. This was someone else entirely. Mark sat, his face blotchy with confusion and anger. Richard reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone. He made a brief call, speaking so quietly I could barely hear him, then set the phone on the table. "What are you doing?" Emma demanded. "Making a point," Richard said. "One that should have been unnecessary. But here we are." 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Emma went to answer it and returned looking bewildered. Behind her came a man in an immaculate suit, carrying a wooden case, followed by another man in the formal attire of a high-end restaurant manager. "Mr. Westfield," the manager said, nodding to Richard with deep respect. "You said it was urgent." Mr. Westfield. I'd never heard Richard's last name used with such deference, such immediate recognition. "Thank you for coming, James. I know it's Christmas evening." "For you, sir. Any time." James gestured to his companion, who set the wooden case on the table and opened it with a soft click. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a bottle of wine that made Patricia's carefully selected dinner selection look like gas station plonk. "Chateau Lafite Rothschild, 1869, James announced. "One of 12 bottles known to exist. Mr. Westfield keeps 3 in his personal collection. He's asked me to open one for this gathering." The silence in the room was absolute. I stared at Richard, my mind trying to reconcile the modest man I knew with the implications of what I was hearing. "The estimated value," James continued, oblivious to the shock spreading through the room like ripples in a pond, "is approximately $300,000. Mr. Westfield acquired it at auction in 2019. Emma's face had gone white. Mark looked like he might be sick. James uncorked the bottle with practiced ease and began pouring small measures into crystal glasses he'd brought with him. "The vintage is exceptional with notes of—" "Thank you, James," Richard said quietly. "That will do. Will you be dining at the restaurant this holiday season, sir? Chef Marchand has been asking." "I'll call him," Richard promised. James and his companion departed, leaving behind the wine and a room full of people whose worldviews had just been shattered like cheap stemware. Patricia found her voice first. Who are you?" Richard took my hand, his fingers warm and steady. "I'm exactly who I said I was. A retired businessman who loves your former daughter-in-law very much. The rest is just details." "Details?" Mark's voice cracked. "That wine costs more than my Porsche." "That wine," Richard corrected, "is one small piece of a collection I've spent 40 years building. But it's just wine, just objects. Your mother-in-law is irreplaceable, Gib, and you've all spent this evening trying to humiliate her through me." He stood, still holding my hand, and I rose with him, my head spinning. Helen came here tonight hoping to bridge a gap with her daughter, to share her happiness, to be included in a family celebration. Instead, you've all shown your true characters. You judge by appearances, by price tags, by the car someone drives or the neighborhood they live in. Richard's gaze moved around the table, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "I choose to live modestly because I learned long ago that the trappings of wealth are empty without substance. I drive a reliable car because I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I live in Riverside because I like the neighbors and the quiet streets. But make no mistake, I could buy this house, this entire block, without checking my bank balance. I could buy Mark's cryptocurrency portfolio and use it to light cigars." Emma made a small sound, almost a whimper. "But I won't," Richard continued, his voice softening, "because that's not who I am. I'm a man who was lucky enough to meet a woman of genuine grace, intelligence, and strength. A woman who survived being undervalued by people who should have cherished her. A woman who raised a daughter who, frankly, should be ashamed of how she's behaved tonight." He picked up the bottle of priceless wine. This is just fermented grapes and time and luck. It's rare, yes. Expensive, yes. But it's nothing compared to the value of treating people with basic human decency." Richard poured the wine down the sink in Patricia's elegant dining room, every $300,000 drop disappearing into the drain. The gasps around the table sounded like a choir of horror. "That's what I think of using money as a weapon," Richard said. "That's what I think of measuring human worth in dollars and cents." He turned to me, his expression gentle again. "Helen, get your coat. We're leaving." I moved like I was in a dream, retrieving our things from the hall closet while everyone sat frozen at the table. As we reached the door, Emma's voice stopped us. "Mom, wait." I turned. My daughter stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I'm so sorry. I became exactly like them. Like Dad's family. I forgot what you taught me about judging people by their character instead of their bank accounts. Richard's hand was warm on my back, supporting me but letting me handle this moment. Emma, I said quietly, I raised you to be better than this. You know how it felt when your father left, how his family treated me like I was suddenly worthless because I wasn't married to him anymore. Why would you do the same to someone I care about? I thought you were being foolish. Rushing into another relationship with someone who seemed like he couldn't provide for you. I was trying to protect you. By humiliating me? The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften them. By mocking the man I love in front of your father's relatives who already disrespect me? I was wrong. Emma's voice broke. I was so wrong. Can you forgive me? I looked at my daughter, seeing past the designer clothes and the makeup, seeing the girl who used to curl up in my lap and tell me I was the smartest, prettiest, best mom in the world. Somewhere along the way, she'd learned the wrong lessons. She'd absorbed the values of people who measured worth in material things. But she was asking for forgiveness. She was crying. She was, perhaps, having a moment of clarity. I can forgive you, I said slowly. But Emma, you need to understand something. Richard's wealth doesn't make him worthy of respect. His character does. The fact that he has money doesn't change what happened here tonight. You all showed me exactly what you think of me, and that's going to take time to heal. Patricia appeared behind Emma, her face a mask of calculated charm now. Helen, surely we can discuss this like civilized people. There's been a misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding, Richard said, his voice like velvet over steel. You attempted to humiliate my fiancé and discovered you'd underestimated her choice of partner. That's not a misunderstanding. That's consequences. He guided me toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, that wine I poured out? I have 2 more bottles. Helen and I will open one on our wedding day, because she deserves to be celebrated. Truly celebrated by people who value her for who she is, not what she can give them or who she's connected to. We stepped out into the cold December night, and I started to laugh. Not polite laughter, but real, genuine, cleansing laughter that came from somewhere deep in my chest. Did you really just pour $300,000 down the drain? I gasped between fits of laughter. I did. Richard was grinning now too. I've been waiting years to do something like that. You have no idea how satisfying it was. We reached his modest Toyota, and he opened my door with the same courtesy he always showed. As he settled into the driver's seat, I touched his arm. Richard Westfield. You never told me your last name? You never asked. His eyes twinkled. You asked me what I liked to read, what made me laugh, what I believed in, what kind of person I wanted to be. You never once asked about my portfolio or my net worth or my business success. Do you know how rare that is? Who are you, really? He started the car, the reliable engine turning over smoothly. I'm exactly who you've known me to be. A man who made money in international shipping and logistics, who invested wisely, who retired at 50 to pursue other interests. A man who collects rare wines and old books and likes long walks and classical music. A man who fell in love with a beautiful, resilient woman at a charity book sale. A man who apparently has enough money to throw away the price of a house on making a point. A man who has enough money to never worry about it again, Richard corrected, which is why I don't think about it much. It's just there, like electricity or running water. Useful, but not defining. He pulled onto the main road, heading away from the house full of people who had tried so hard to make me feel small. Where are we going? I asked. I made reservations at Marchand's, the restaurant where James works. I thought we might need a backup plan tonight. Of course he had. Richard was always 3 steps ahead, always prepared, always protecting me in ways both large and small. And tomorrow? I asked. Tomorrow, if you'd like, we can start planning our wedding. Something simple, I thought. Close friends, the people who matter, maybe on the terrace of my beach house in Malibu. Your beach house in Malibu. One of 3 properties. I also have a place in Vermont for skiing and an apartment in New York for when I want to see shows. I thought I'd mention them now before you think I'm keeping more secrets. I started laughing again, that same cleansing, liberating laughter. What else should I know, Mr. Westfield? I have a daughter myself, Victoria. She lives in London with her wife and their 2 children. I think you'll like her. She's brilliant and kind and has absolutely no patience for status-seeking or pretension. She's going to love you. You have a daughter and grandchildren. I was waiting for the right time to introduce you. I wanted to make sure we were serious first. Victoria is very protective of me, and she's seen too many people interested in my money rather than me. I didn't know about your money. Exactly. Richard reached over and squeezed my hand. You saw me. Just me. That's why I knew I wanted to marry you. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights blurring past the windows. I thought about Emma's tears, about Patricia's shock, about the wine spiraling down the drain, about how much my life had changed in 6 months. Richard? Yes, love? Thank you for defending me tonight. But also, thank you for letting me see what I needed to see. I've been holding on to hope that Emma would come around, that the family would accept me again if I just tried hard enough. Tonight showed me I was chasing something that isn't worth having. Family is important, Richard said carefully. If Emma truly wants to make amends, I won't stand in the way of that. But she needs to do the work to earn your trust back. And she needs to understand that you're not the same woman who used to beg for scraps of their approval. No, I agreed. I'm not. We pulled up to Marchand's, where a valet hurried to take the car despite its humble appearance. The maître greeted Richard by name and led us to a private table overlooking the city. As we settled in, champagne appeared without being ordered. The chef himself came out to greet us, kissing me on both cheeks like I was visiting royalty. Mr. Westfield has told me so much about you, Chef Marchand said with a warm smile. He says you are the love of his life. I looked at Richard, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. It's true, he said simply. At my age, I know what matters. I know what I want. And I want to spend whatever time I have left making you as happy as you make me. The chef departed, promising to prepare something special, and we were left alone with our champagne and the twinkling lights of the city below. I keep waiting to wake up, I admitted. This feels like a fairy tale. It's not a fairy tale, Richard said. It's just life when you choose to live it honestly, when you value the right things. When you're brave enough to be yourself regardless of what others think, he raised his glass. To Emma learning to measure wealth in character instead of currency. To your ex-husband's family discovering that their opinions matter far less than they believed. And to us, building a life based on genuine affection rather than impressive appearances. I clinked my glass against his. To us, and to the most spectacular dramatic exit I've ever witnessed. You haven't seen anything yet? Richard said with a smile. Wait until they Google my name and discover I'm on the Forbes list. Wait until Emma realizes that her mother's poor fiancé could buy her father's company without noticing the expense. Wait until Patricia understands she tried to humiliate someone who has dined with presidents and prime ministers. You've dined with presidents? Charity events mostly. Very boring usually. Much less interesting than book sales where you might meet the love of your life. The food arrived course after perfect course, each one a small work of art. We ate and talked and laughed, and I felt the tension of the evening dissolving like sugar in warm tea. My phone buzzed repeatedly, Emma texting apologies and requests to talk. I silenced it. You'll forgive her, Richard said. It wasn't a question. Eventually, when she's ready to actually change, not just apologize because she's embarrassed. Good. Don't make it easy. People only value what they have to work for. As we finished our meal, Richard reached across the table and took both my hands in his. Helen, I need you to understand something. Everything I have, all the money and properties and collections, they're just things. They're interesting, sometimes useful, occasionally impressive, but they're not what matters. What matters is waking up next to you. What matters is hearing you laugh. What matters is growing old with someone who sees me, truly sees me, not the portfolio or the reputation or the connections. I felt tears pricking my eyes. I do see you. I see a man who treats waiters with respect and reads poetry and cries at sad movies and loves his daughter and makes me feel valued every single day. Then marry me, he said. Not because I'm wealthy, though that's a nice bonus. Not because I can give you things or take you places or introduce you to important people. Marry me because we make each other better, because we're honest with each other, because at 50 and 55, we're wise enough to know that this kind of connection is rare and precious and worth building a life around. I already said yes, I reminded him. I know, but I wanted to ask again after tonight, after you know the full picture. I wanted you to choose me with all the information. I squeezed his hands. Richard Westfield, I choose you. Rich or poor, famous or unknown. I choose the man who poured priceless wine down a drain to make a point about what really matters. I choose the man who defended me when no one else would. I choose the man who loves me for exactly who I am. He kissed my hands, his eyes bright with emotion. We should probably tell Emma about the beach house before the wedding, I said, and your daughter, and the Forbes list situation. Probably, Richard agreed. Or we could just let them discover it all gradually and enjoy watching their reactions. You have a mischievous streak. You have no idea, my love. You have no idea. We left the restaurant hand in hand, stepping out into a city transformed by Christmas lights and possibilities. Richard's modest Toyota waited at the curb, and I thought about how appearances really were deceiving, how we judge by surfaces when the depths are what contain the treasures. Tomorrow I would call Emma. Tomorrow I would begin the process of rebuilding that relationship on new terms, with new boundaries, with a new understanding of my own worth. But tonight, I let Richard drive me home to his townhouse in modest Riverside, where I now knew we wouldn't be living much longer. We'd probably move to the beach house, or maybe the Vermont property, or maybe we'd buy something new together, something that was ours rather than his or mine. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd walked into that Christmas dinner as a woman seeking approval and walked out as a woman who no longer needed it. What mattered was that I'd chosen a partner who valued character over appearances, substance over flash, love over luxury. Though having a man who possessed both depth and wealth was, I had to admit, a rather delightful bonus. As we pulled into the driveway, Richard turned to me with that gentle smile I'd fallen in love with at a humble book sale 6 months ago. Merry Christmas, Helen. Merry Christmas, Richard. And it truly was.